to you again. Thank you for staying with us on Morning Barbados. Before we went to break, Colin mentioned the fact that we're talking about Wi-Fi now with regards to social implications, and we talked about it from all kinds of angles this morning. Joining us now, we have Professor Henry Fraser. He is a social commentator, he is a historian, so many things he can talk with us about, but this morning we're going to get his views on certainly the erosion of village life, whether this is having an impact on that, etc. Good morning, Professor Fraser.
Good morning.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good. So where do we start with this? What are your feelings on Wi-Fi?
I think, as someone said earlier on the program, it's happening and it's necessary for us to be competitive. It's the way the world is going. So it's no sense the old stagers sitting back and saying, you know, things were wonderful in the old days when we could sit on the veranda and rock in our chairs and chat. Life has changed. Life is different. Life is different. And if Barbados wants to be at the top, then it's got to have Wi-Fi, and everyone accepts that and wants it and hopes that it will do the wonderful things that we anticipate it might do. Certainly connectivity is great, and when we consider how we function today with how we functioned 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I first came home and had to communicate with my boss in Jamaica at the university, you wrote a letter, the secretary typed it, it got in the mail if there were stamps. It took 10 days to get to Jamaica. You got a reply, you know, so a month later you got an answer to your query. Life has changed completely. But the downside, of course, is the way the connectivity that some people become addicted to affects other aspects of their social relations. You're a doctor, you're sitting in your office, a patient is being interviewed, you're trying to get to the bottom of their illness, and their cell phone goes off. And they answer their cell phone, and they're now divided between their responsibility to you and their responsibility to their daughter, their son, their employer, their boss, their friend, and they spend a full minute trying to get off of that phone. So that is a very, very serious downside. You're in a train. I've just come back from Britain. You're in a train in Britain, and the passenger next to you answers his cell phone and proceeds to have a half-hour conversation with his brother or his boss or his employee. And sometimes the noise level reverberates. You can be in a train and there are 5 cell phone conversations going on, and some of them can be quite intimate. So these are some of the obvious social downsides. The other aspect is, you mentioned village life. Well, I mean, that's the community and the communion between people when they're making 4 eyes. Now, there was a psychologist called Eric Byrne about 35 years ago, wrote a fantastic book called Games People Play, about the importance of that social interaction, the importance of how you communicate with people. If I meet you in the morning, every morning, on my way to the bus stop, and we're accustomed to saying, good morning, how are you, nice weather, isn't it? And then one morning you avert your eyes and you don't look at me, I am devastated. We need those social interactions, and that is what this kind of connectivity has lost. People who are glued to their iPod, iPad, cell phone, BlackBerry, and ignore the person who's in their presence, so that the instrument and the distant communication becomes more important than the personal and the intimate communication. And then there are the other problems, you know, the personality problems and the clashes and the absolutely devastating situations that can develop because of a misunderstanding of emails. Someone sends an email, it doesn't have the nuance of your smile or your look, and that email is totally misinterpreted. Or you are emailing me about him and somehow you click the wrong thing and he gets it. That's the end of your relationship. And so these are just a few of the downsides.
All right, well, I'm feeling you, Professor, in a number of the things that you said, right? Because I remember getting to Toronto for the first time and getting to the bus stop, and there were a few people there and saying hello, because I was just fresh from the Caribbean, and everybody looked at their toes. And I thought, my goodness, what but when you juxtapose the fact that we, in close proximity, are sort of avoiding each other by being glued to these devices, but you have now the situation where if you have a son or daughter, a brother, sister in a far off place, you can actually speak to them, sometimes even see them via video and that sort of thing. Right. How do you juxtapose those two things?
Well, everything has a good and bad side. usually. Sometimes the bad outweighs the good, and sometimes the good outweighs the bad. So the important thing here is discretion, because certainly when I went off to university, you made a call at Christmas. And you had to book that telephone call 40 years ago. So now the fact that we can communicate immediately with our loved ones overseas, we can talk to our son and the grandchildren, and we can look at them on Skype, and we can do all of these great things. There's no question that is wonderful. The challenge is to balance it with the people whom you are with and the community that you live within. And again, you mentioned the village. I have a particular vision and view of what's gone wrong in Barbados, and a great deal of it has got to do with the loss of that village. There was, you remember, a few years ago, a big buzz about the phrase, "It takes a village
to raise a child."
Well, the villages used to raise the children, and they no longer do. We have to keep our doors locked. And if the lady in the house next to yours was to let you know what she had seen your little boy doing, then she would probably be abused as interfering. So these are issues that have changed, certainly. And you know, one of the things that I find amazing, neither our politicians, our priests, or our social scientists have commented on the fact that one of the great disadvantages of globalization is that we no longer have village shops run by a villager within the village. We now have a big McGuffey. We have Shell and Esso and Mobil, or whoever, Texaco, with their little smart supermarket by the petrol station. So the young people hang out by the petrol station, and the old people who ran the village shop are out of work.
Okay.
Have you, I just want to continue this a little bit. Have you ever tried, I mean, I don't know if you thought about it, to deconstruct why we are so distant from people who are closer to us, but yet we find a friend on Facebook who we haven't seen for 20 years, and we're so happy and we're so excited to stay in contact with them. But we have people who are right next door, like you said, and we're not even wanting to be in that contact. Have you tried to deconstruct that?
Yes, well, it's several things happening there. Taking your friend for granted, taking your neighbor for granted, taking your partner for granted, and that's the worst of all, of course, and being temporarily, and I think temporarily excited by making new contacts again. Because you often make a contact with an old school friend after 30 years, and you wonder, well, how did we lose touch? But you know, after a couple of exchanges, you realize that your lives are in fact very different, and you should be investing that time with your partner.
Indeed. Would you say that a new kind of village has been developed, though? I mean, it's not the traditional village where we can physically go out and just hang out and be one happy family, and you bring some pie today, and you know, Ms. Watson brings some lemonade or mobby. Is it, would you describe it as a different kind of a village?
I think it lacks the closeness. I think it lacks the intimacy. I think it lacks the personal interaction, the view of each other, the touch, the feel, the smile, the warmth. It definitely lacks that. And certainly you mentioned the friends on the internet. Well, it might be old friends, which are great, but we know the extent to which the new friends create problems, the seduction that takes place on the internet because of the mystery, the excitement of young people making those contacts, which often get them into trouble, maybe lose their lives.
Is that one of the things too about being connected in this sort of way, is that you can be anybody you want to be under the guise, because you're not face to face. You know, an old friend, you don't have to be, you don't see how much you've aged, or a new friend, you can be anything. Is that part of it too?
Yes, people obviously pretend, and there's no way of checking them out.
And it's kind of fraudulent that, you know, and while Facebook is great, everybody's a friend. It kind of makes the whole word friend mean something else, because friend is supposed to be a process. This is a nurtured process, somebody you really get to know. But if you say, yes, you can talk with me via Facebook, you're my friend.
Yes. Well, in the words of Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland, a world can mean what you choose to make it mean. But this kind of relationship completely spoils the relationships at home. My wife sometimes calls my computer my mistress, because I am there trying to deal with all these email messages that have come in. They include the ones from the very close friends, they include the ones from family, they include the ones to do with work, with your hobbies, with your passions, with other things that are happening, plus the junk mail. And you know, if someone quite close to you sends you a video that they think it would really be wonderful for you to see, if you don't spend those 5 minutes watching that video, when they see you the next day,
and
or
they say, they ask
didn't-
you about it.
now you
You're
get into
accountable, man.
that little white lie. But really, there is so much coming through on this communication. I am not on Facebook. I wouldn't dare, you know, because I am already spending far more time at the computer than I should with my friends, with my wife, and so on. So there is the downside, and it requires enormous discretion and good manners and a sense of what is reasonable and judgment to play it all.
It's interesting that you've said and good manners. We're going to focus more on that in a very short while with Stephanie Goddard. She knows about
But I feel very
good
strongly
manners.
about this because
Yeah.
people do not even use their messaging in a polite way. You get messages that are so short, so sharp, and then of course you have another problem, and that is the inability of many people today to even write a constructed, properly
with actual
constructed
words.
sentence.
That's another issue,
You know,
Prof.
that
but
is another whole issue.
We'd have to bring you back to discuss that
Yes.
point. And thank you very much, Professor Henry Fraser. How was retirement going, by the way?
Oh, fantastic. But my wife says she still has to make appointments to see me, you see, because of all of this communication. Anyway, we've got lots of books coming out. There are 2 books in press right now, which will be coming, so we can talk about them in a couple
Another
of months.
Definitely. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Professor Henry Fraser, social commentator. You were looking at some of the social aspects of being connected in that kind of way. We'll be back with more on Morning Barbados.
Don't